In the heart of the city, where the sounds of busy streets and honking cars never ceased, there stood a small karate dojo. To the casual observer, it seemed just like any other martial arts school, with its walls adorned with trophies and martial arts memorabilia. But inside this dojo was something much more than just the typical students. There was a story that would soon change everything. On a cold, windy afternoon, a man walked up to the dojo's front door. His shoes were torn and his clothes hung loosely from his frame. He looked out of place, like a person who had seen more pain than most could understand. His name was Marcus. He had no money, no home, and no family to turn to. But there was something about him, an aura of quiet determination. Despite the rough exterior, there was a fire inside him that refused to be extinguished. Marcus was homeless, but there was something the world didn't know about him. He was a karate legend. Once he had been at the peak of his game, known across the country for his skill and discipline. But life had taken its toll, and over time he'd fallen into the shadows. Yet despite his circumstances, Marcus had never given up on the one thing that had always kept him going: karate. As Marcus walked toward the dojo, a group of young students stood outside, laughing and chatting among themselves. They were dressed in crisp white gi, ready for their next class. As they saw Marcus approach, their laughter quieted. They exchanged glances, their eyes scanning his worn clothes and ragged shoes. "He can't even afford shoes," one of them whispered. "And he wants to spar?" The others snickered, shaking their heads. They couldn't imagine someone like him being a serious contender in the dojo. They assumed he was just another homeless person looking for a place to stay, someone who was only there to waste time. But Marcus wasn't fazed by their whispers. He had heard it all before. The mockery, the doubts, the assumptions. He had faced worse in his life. The judgment of others was nothing compared to the battles he had fought within himself. He had once been a champion, a man who had earned respect from the most skilled martial artists in the world. Now he was determined to reclaim that respect, not for fame, not for glory, but for himself. With a calm and steady hand, Marcus opened the dojo's door and stepped inside. The sensei, a stern but fair man named Master Tanaka, looked up from his desk as Marcus entered. He saw the disheveled figure standing in the doorway and raised an eyebrow. At first he assumed Marcus was there for something trivial, maybe to ask for a free class or a handout. "Can I help you?" Master Tanaka asked, his tone neutral. Marcus nodded, his voice soft but firm. "I'd like to join the class." The room fell silent. The students who had been watching Marcus's entrance exchanged confused looks. They were used to newcomers, but they were not used to someone like him, a man who looked like he had never stepped foot in a dojo, let alone trained in martial arts. Master Tanaka studied Marcus for a moment, his gaze shifting from his worn clothes to his eyes, which were filled with a quiet strength. There was something about the man that felt different from the usual visitors. Still, Master Tanaka's skepticism lingered. "Are you sure you want to train here?" he asked, trying to gauge the man's seriousness. "We are a dojo for serious students. If you're looking for charity, you won't find it here." Marcus nodded again. "I'm serious," he said, his voice steady. "I've trained before. I want to continue." Master Tanaka hesitated. He had seen many people come and go, but something about Marcus intrigued him. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. "All right. You can stay for today's class. But remember, this is not a place for anyone to waste time." Marcus bowed respectfully, a gesture that seemed both natural and intentional. His presence, though humble, commanded a certain respect. The students, still skeptical, resumed their positions on the mat, though their whispers continued. As the class began, Marcus fell into the routine without hesitation. The warm-up exercises, the basic stances, the kata, all of it flowed through him like second nature. It wasn't the fluidity of a novice or even an intermediate student. It was the precision of a master who had spent countless hours perfecting his craft. The students who had initially dismissed him now watched with growing interest. There was something almost otherworldly about the way Marcus moved. His strikes were sharp and controlled, his footwork light and swift. He moved through the motions with a grace that seemed to defy his appearance. This wasn't just a man trying to get by. This was a warrior who had once been at the top of his game. As the class progressed, Marcus continued to impress the students. His form was flawless, his technique refined, as if every movement was etched into his muscle memory. But it wasn't just his physical skill that stood out. It was his focus. Despite the whispers and stares, Marcus didn't waver. He didn't let the judgment of others affect him. He was there for one reason and one reason only: to train. The students who had once mocked him now found themselves questioning their assumptions. How could someone who appeared so out of place be so skilled? They began to wonder, was there more to Marcus than met the eye? By the end of the class, Marcus had earned something he hadn't expected: respect. It wasn't just from the sensei, who had watched the entire class with increasing admiration. It was from the students who now saw him not as a homeless man, but as someone who possessed an extraordinary talent. As the students left the dojo, they whispered amongst themselves, their earlier mockery replaced by awe. "He's incredible," one of them said. "Yeah," another agreed. "I never thought he'd be so good." Marcus, meanwhile, stood quietly by the door, watching them leave. He hadn't come to the dojo for their praise or admiration. He had come for himself. But as he stood there, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to see that the journey back to greatness was just as important as the destination. As he walked out of the dojo, the cold air hit him, but it didn't feel as harsh as before. He was still homeless, still without a place to call his own. But today he had reclaimed a piece of his soul, and that, he knew, was just the beginning. The days that followed were a test of patience for both Marcus and the students at the dojo. While they had seen his skill and commitment during that first class, the lingering questions remained. Who was this man, really? Where had he come from? What made him so different from everyone else? These questions buzzed in the air, but they weren't voiced openly. Instead, they silently followed Marcus around as he returned every day. Same time, same quiet determination. For Marcus, the dojo was a sanctuary. The moment he stepped through its doors, the noise of the outside world faded away. Here he was not just a homeless man. He was a martial artist again. And as he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his gi, now a little cleaner from the washing he'd done the night before, he felt that old sense of pride return. It wasn't the pride of victory or recognition, but the pride of doing something for the sheer love of it. It was the pride of knowing that his skill had never left him, even if the world had forgotten who he was. The students, however, were still unsure what to make of him. They couldn't deny his ability on the mat, but his rough, disheveled appearance still sparked judgment. The whispers continued, soft enough not to catch the attention of the sensei, but loud enough to reach Marcus's ears. At first he ignored them. After all, he had heard much worse in his lifetime. But there were moments, brief moments, when their words stung, and he wondered if they would ever truly accept him. Master Tanaka, too, watched Marcus closely. The man had never once asked for special treatment. He didn't seek a free pass or try to skip the tough lessons. But he also didn't speak much of his past. All the sensei knew was that Marcus had come in, asked to train, and had proven himself time and again. It wasn't typical for someone of his age, let alone his condition, to show up at a dojo and perform with such precision. The sensei couldn't help but be curious, but there was a part of him that still wondered if this man's presence in his dojo was a fluke. One evening, as the class progressed through their drills, Master Tanaka paired off the students for sparring practice. Marcus, as usual, stood quietly to the side, waiting to be called. He had no fear of stepping onto the mat. It was what he had done his entire life. But when Tanaka called his name, the atmosphere shifted. The students who had been silently watching him for weeks now turned their full attention to the match. Jake, a young, brash fighter with a tendency to boast about his skills, was the first to step forward. Jake had always been confident in his abilities, often making fun of the newer, less experienced students. He had barely acknowledged Marcus up until now, but seeing him called to spar, a competitive fire ignited inside him. "Don't worry, old man," Jake smirked, his voice carrying across the room. "I'll make this quick." The sensei nodded but said nothing, watching the interaction unfold. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. He stepped onto the mat, his eyes steady and calm. "Let's see what you've got," Marcus said quietly, his voice betraying no emotion. The students formed a loose circle around the mat, their eyes wide with anticipation. They had never seen Jake fight anyone with so much experience. And though Marcus appeared calm, there was something about the way he stood, something confident, that made them uneasy. Jake moved first, launching a quick jab aimed at Marcus's face. It was fast, sharp, the kind of strike that would have floored a less experienced fighter. But Marcus didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly to the left, just enough to avoid the punch, then sidestepped Jake's follow-up right hook. In one fluid motion, Marcus grabbed Jake's arm, twisted it, and before the young fighter could react, he had him pinned to the mat. The room fell silent. The students who had been watching eagerly were stunned into disbelief. Jake struggled beneath Marcus, trying to break free, but it was clear he couldn't. Marcus had him in a hold that was precise and calculated. He wasn't using excessive force, he didn't need to. With a soft, controlled voice, Marcus spoke. The key is not in overpowering your opponent. It's in understanding their movements. When you control their energy, you control the fight. Jake, now embarrassed and breathing heavily, finally tapped the mat, signaling his surrender. The room erupted into hushed murmurs. They had just witnessed something remarkable. Jake, the cocky young fighter who never lost, had been beaten without even landing a blow. Master Tanaka, who had watched the entire sparring session, finally spoke. Marcus, you've shown them what true martial arts is about. Not just power, but wisdom, patience, and control. But remember, he added, turning to Jake, every loss is a lesson. This dojo isn't about showing off, it's about learning. Jake, his face flushed with humiliation, nodded silently. He had been taught an invaluable lesson, and it wasn't by the person he expected. The students were no longer whispering in the background. Now their attention was fully on Marcus. They watched him not just as a man who had beaten Jake, but as someone who had done so with grace. He hadn't needed to prove anything to anyone. His quiet confidence spoke louder than any boast could have. Over the next few weeks, the dojo transformed. Marcus's reputation, once built on mockery and doubt, began to shift. The younger students approached him, asking for tips, advice, or simply to watch him practice. He was no longer the outsider. He was becoming a mentor. One evening, after a long and exhausting class, Marcus stayed behind as the students left. He wasn't done yet. His sweat had dried, but his muscles still burned with the familiar ache of effort. He stood in front of the mirror, practicing kata after kata, his movements fluid and precise as though time had no power over him. The rhythm of his breathing was the only sound that filled the room. Master Tanaka watched from the doorway. He had come to respect Marcus not only for his skills but for his dedication. The older man had seen many fighters come and go, but Marcus was different. His focus was unshakable. His humility was unmatched. It was clear now that Marcus wasn't just training for himself. He was teaching others without even saying a word. As Tanaka approached, he couldn't help but speak. You've become more than just a student here, Marcus. Marcus stopped mid-motion, turning to face the sensei. I'm not here for fame, he said simply. I'm here to continue what I started long ago. I don't need recognition, just the chance to train. Master Tanaka nodded. He understood. Marcus had never asked for anything more than an opportunity, and in return he had brought something the dojo had long been missing, true martial spirit. But the journey was far from over. The road ahead would test Marcus in ways he couldn't yet foresee. There were still many lessons to be learned and challenges to face, both on and off the mat. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt something he hadn't in a long while, a sense of purpose. And as he left the dojo that night, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The world may have forgotten who he was, but here, in this dojo, he was starting to remember. As Marcus continued to train at the dojo, his presence began to shift the energy inside its walls. The students who had once dismissed him now looked to him with newfound respect. They had seen his skill firsthand, and more than that, they had begun to understand the deeper lessons he taught without saying a word. Marcus was no longer just a man who had fallen into hard times. He was a living testament to the power of persistence, humility, and the unyielding spirit of a true martial artist. Yet, not all the students had embraced him fully. While most had come to admire his dedication and skill, a few still held on to their doubts and arrogance. Jake, though he had been defeated in sparring, still struggled with the lesson he had learned. His pride, wounded by his loss, refused to accept that someone like Marcus, someone with no status, no home, and no visible wealth, could be better than him in the dojo. Every time Marcus stepped onto the mat, Jake watched from the sidelines, trying to hide the simmering resentment that boiled inside him. Marcus had taught him a lesson, yes, but it was a lesson he wasn't ready to accept. Every time he saw Marcus performing a kata or guiding the younger students, he felt a bitter sting. He told himself that it was just a fluke, that he could beat Marcus if they sparred again. But Marcus never pushed Jake. He was patient, offering advice only when asked. He understood that not everyone could see things from his perspective. He had been through much worse than this petty rivalry, and he knew that Jake's frustration was only part of his journey. Still, there was a weight in the air whenever Jake was around, a subtle tension that only seemed to grow. As the days passed, it was on one particular evening that this tension would reach its breaking point. The dojo had just finished a rigorous training session, and the students were gathering their things to leave. Marcus, as usual, stayed behind. He had become accustomed to the quiet solitude of the dojo after hours. The stillness allowed him to focus, to center his thoughts, and to perfect the moves that had once made him a champion. But this time, as he stood in front of the mirror, performing the slow, deliberate movements of a kata, he wasn't alone. From the corner of the room, Jake stood watching. There was an intense look on his face, one that Marcus had seen before, on the faces of challengers who didn't fully understand the strength they were about to face. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice thick with barely contained anger. "You think you're something special, don't you? You've been here showing off, teaching the others your fancy moves, but you're nothing. You are nothing, and you're still nothing." Marcus stopped mid-movement, turning his gaze toward Jake. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm understanding. "Jake," Marcus said softly, "I'm not here to prove anything to anyone but myself. The real challenge is not against someone else. It's against the person you were yesterday." Jake's jaw tightened. "Don't lecture me. You think because you beat me once, you're the better man? I'll show you. I'll show all of you." Marcus stood silently, his posture relaxed yet poised. He had learned over the years that pride often clouded judgment. It was evident in Jake's eyes. But Marcus wasn't going to fight out of anger or ego. He was here to teach. And sometimes the best lesson came through action. Without a word, Marcus stepped onto the mat. Jake followed, his movements more aggressive than usual, driven by an uncontrollable need to prove himself. As he stood facing Marcus, his fists clenched in tight, sharp motions, ready to throw the first punch. His stance was wide, a display of strength, but Marcus knew it was flawed. The strength Jake relied on was raw, but it lacked the discipline that true martial arts demanded. Jake moved first, a quick jab aimed directly at Marcus's chest. It was fast and powerful, but Marcus anticipated the move. He dodged effortlessly, stepping aside with the precision of someone who had studied the rhythm of the fight, not just the moves. Jake's face twisted with frustration as he threw a series of rapid punches, each one designed to overwhelm his opponent with speed. But Marcus was a wall of calm, blocking and evading with grace, his movements as fluid as water. For a brief moment, Jake felt the rising tide of panic. His punches were being blocked without effort. His quick strikes weren't having the effect he'd expected. He wasn't even landing a hit. It wasn't just that Marcus was faster. It was that Marcus seemed to be reading him, understanding his every move before it even happened. "Why won't you fight back?" Jake shouted, frustration boiling over. "Why are you just dodging, letting me look like a fool?" Marcus sighed, taking a step back. "Jake, fighting isn't about winning. It's about understanding yourself and the person in front of you. You're trying to prove something, but you're letting your ego cloud your judgment. Martial arts isn't about showing how strong you are. It's about showing how strong you can be without fighting." Jake's chest heaved as he took a step back, trying to catch his breath. His body was tense, his mind racing. "I don't need your advice," he growled. But even as he said it, he knew the words were hollow. He wasn't angry at Marcus. He was angry at himself. Without warning, he lunged forward again, his movements more desperate this time. He wanted to land just one hit, just one strike that would prove he was better. But Marcus was already moving, his body flowing around Jake's strikes like water around rocks. And then, with a swift movement, Marcus deflected Jake's attack and gently swept his feet from under him, sending him crashing to the mat. The room went completely silent. For a moment, all that could be heard was Jake's labored breathing as he lay on the mat, his pride shattered. Marcus stood over him, not in victory, but in quiet understanding. Slowly, Jake reached out and took Marcus's hand, pulling himself to his feet. I don't know what to say," Jake admitted, his voice quieter now. "I thought I was better than you, but I see now. I was wrong," Marcus nodded. "It's not about being better. It's about being the best version of yourself. The students who had been watching the sparring match began to gather around, their eyes wide with realization. They had seen Jake, the cocky fighter, fall. But they had also seen something else, that there was more to being a true martial artist than just the physical moves. It was about the heart, the mind, and the spirit. As the evening came to a close, the dojo was filled with a new energy. The students no longer looked at Marcus with skepticism. They looked at him with respect. And Marcus, for the first time in a long while, felt like he had found a place where he truly belonged. He hadn't come to prove anything to anyone, but by simply being himself, he had shown everyone that true strength wasn't about the past or the things you had lost. It was about what you were willing to give, the lessons you could teach, and the courage to stand back up when life knocked you down. As the days turned into weeks, the dojo became a place of change, not just for Marcus but for the students as well. It was clear that something transformative was happening within its walls. The students, once distracted and focused only on their personal goals, now began to train with a new purpose. They weren't just learning karate anymore. They were learning what it meant to be disciplined, to be humble, and to embrace the journey of self-improvement. And then there was Marcus, the quiet man with a past he refused to speak of, whose presence had sparked this change. He had become the foundation of this transformation, though no one truly knew the depth of his story. To the students and even to Master Tanaka, Marcus was simply an enigma, an exceptional fighter, a teacher, but a man with a past that remained locked away behind a wall of silence. It wasn't until one evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow through the dojo windows, that Marcus finally decided to share the truth of who he was. Master Tanaka had stayed late that evening, as he often did, reviewing techniques and planning the next training session. The dojo had emptied out after the day's class, with only a few lingering students finishing their practice. Marcus, as usual, was one of the last to leave, but tonight he wasn't heading toward the door. He stood by the mirrors, adjusting his gi, taking deep breaths, as though preparing himself for something monumental. Tanaka watched him from across the room, a sense of curiosity building in his mind. The man had never asked for special attention, and yet Tanaka couldn't help but feel that there was something more to him than what met the eye. It was almost as if Marcus was waiting for the right moment to reveal himself fully. "Marcus," Master Tanaka called softly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "You've been with us for some time now, and I think it's time I ask you something I've been wondering for weeks." Marcus turned, his eyes locking with the sensei's. "What is it, Master Tanaka?" The sensei stood up, crossing the floor to stand beside him. "Who are you, really? I know you've told us you've trained before, but there's more to you than just that. You don't carry yourself like a beginner. Your movements, your understanding of martial arts, there's history in you. And it's not just a history of practice. It's a history of greatness." For the first time since Marcus had entered the dojo, he felt the weight of the question. The truth, long buried and guarded by years of hardship, seemed to rise to the surface. He had always known this moment would come, the moment when he could no longer keep his past hidden, not from the people who had come to respect him. But in this moment he wasn't sure how to speak of it. His past had been both a source of pride and pain, a story of triumph and loss. "I was once a champion," Marcus said, his voice soft but steady. "I was at the top of my game. I won national karate championships. I trained under some of the best martial artists in the world. But it wasn't just about the titles. It was about the art, the discipline, the way it shaped me." Master Tanaka listened intently, his expression serious. "But then, what happened? How did you end up here in this state?" Marcus took a deep breath, looking down at his hands, now calloused from years of training. "Life happened," he said quietly. "I lost everything, my family, my home, my purpose. My career fell apart due to circumstances I couldn't control. I became someone I didn't recognize, someone I thought I'd never be. And for a long time I stopped believing in myself." Tanaka's brow furrowed, his tone shifting with empathy. "I'm sorry, Marcus. That sounds like a difficult road." Marcus nodded. "It was, but it was also the road I had to walk. I lost everything, but in doing so I found something important. I found the strength to rebuild. And that strength was never about winning trophies or championships. It was about the courage to face who I was and rise above the pain." Master Tanaka stood in silence for a moment, contemplating Marcus's words. It was clear to him now. Marcus wasn't just a man who had fallen from grace. He was a man who had lived through the depths of hardship and had found the courage to return to what he loved, to what he was born to do. Tanaka could see it now, the wisdom in Marcus's eyes, the unspoken strength in his movements. The man was not just a martial artist. He was a survivor. "You're teaching more than just karate here, Marcus," Tanaka said, his voice filled with respect. "You're teaching us about resilience, about humility, and about the power of overcoming." Marcus gave a small smile, his expression softening. "I didn't come here to teach those lessons. I came here because karate is the only thing I have left. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing what I know, I can help someone else find their own way, just like I did." As Tanaka processed Marcus's words, a realization began to form. This wasn't just about the dojo or about Marcus's training. This was about something deeper, something more powerful. The sensei had always believed in the transformative power of martial arts, but now he saw it in full force. Marcus had come to the dojo not to reclaim his past, but to build a new future, and in doing so, he had become an inspiration to everyone around him. Later that evening, after the dojo had emptied out and the final class was over, Tanaka gathered the students together for a final message. They were seated in a circle, each one tired from a long day of training, but their faces were eager, expectant. They had learned so much from Marcus, from his silent strength to his patient guidance. Now they would hear from him directly. Tanaka spoke first. "Tonight, we learn something more than just the techniques of karate. We learn about the strength it takes to overcome our struggles, to rise above the challenges that life throws at us." He turned to Marcus, who was standing at the back of the room. "Marcus, would you like to share your story with them?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. He had never been one to speak much about his past, but he realized that in this moment, sharing his story could help others. He stepped forward, his posture straight and proud, though the humility never left his demeanor. "The road I've walked hasn't been easy," Marcus began, "but I've learned something important along the way. It's not about where you've been, but where you're going. Every setback, every failure is just another opportunity to learn and grow. And no matter how many times life knocks you down, it's up to you to stand back up and keep moving forward." The students listened intently, their eyes wide with understanding. This wasn't just a lesson about karate. It was a lesson about life, about resilience, about never giving up. "No matter how hard the journey may be, I may not have my trophies or titles anymore," Marcus continued, "but I have something better. I have the opportunity to pass on what I've learned, to show you that no matter where you start, you can always rise higher, and that to me is the greatest victory of all." The room was silent for a moment as Marcus's words sank in. Then one by one the students stood up and bowed to him. They were no longer just students of karate. They were students of life, and Marcus had taught them something far more valuable than any technique could. Master Tanaka smiled, watching the scene unfold. He knew that Marcus had come to the dojo for his own reasons, but in doing so, he had given them all something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Weeks had passed since Marcus shared his story with the dojo. Since then, the atmosphere within the dojo had shifted dramatically. The students, once filled with youthful arrogance, had begun to embrace the lessons Marcus had quietly taught them. They trained harder, more deliberately, and with a new sense of purpose. No longer were they just fighting to win. Now they were fighting to improve, to grow, and to learn from each and every experience. For Marcus, the dojo had become more than just a place of training. It was a place of healing. Every strike, every movement, every breath he took within those walls was a step further away from the painful past he had left behind. He still lived on the streets, still struggled with the harsh realities of life, but inside the dojo, he had found a home, a place where his heart could finally find peace. Yet despite the progress, there was still one thing lingering in the back of his mind: the tournament. It was a regional karate tournament, a prestigious event that drew fighters from all over the country. For most of the students, it was a chance to showcase their skills and gain recognition. But for Marcus, the tournament represented something different. It was a test, not just of his martial arts ability, but of his journey. It was an opportunity to prove to himself that despite all he had lost, he still had something worth fighting for. Master Tanaka had invited Marcus to compete, offering him a chance to return to the world he had once known so well. At first, Marcus had hesitated, He didn't want to return to the competitive world of karate. It was a world that had taken so much from him. But Tanaka had insisted, telling him that it wasn't about the past or the glory. It was about showing that the journey could be just as meaningful as the destination. So, after much contemplation, Marcus agreed to enter the tournament. But it wasn't for the trophies or the recognition. It was for the lesson. It was for the students who had looked up to him, who had followed his example. He wanted to show them that victory wasn't about being the best. It was about giving your best no matter the circumstances. The day of the tournament arrived and the dojo was filled with nervous energy. The students gathered, their GI perfectly pressed, their belts tied tightly around their waists. But among them stood Marcus, dressed in the same worn clothes he had always worn. His GI was simple, not pristine like the others, but it was enough. It represented his journey, the battles he had fought, the setbacks he had overcome. As the bus pulled up to the tournament venue, Marcus could feel the tension in the air. The gymnasium was massive, filled with rows of bleachers and the hum of excited spectators. The floor was lined with martial arts mats and the smell of sweat and anticipation lingered in the air. For a moment, Marcus felt a pang of uncertainty. He had not stepped into a competitive arena in years. What if he wasn't as good as he remembered? What if he couldn't live up to the expectations of the students who had come to watch him? But as he stood in the doorway of the gymnasium, he took a deep breath. He had come this far and there was no turning back now. Inside the gym, the tournament was in full swing. Fighters of all ages and skill levels were competing, each one eager to prove their worth. Marcus could see the younger students from the dojo, nervously watching from the sidelines. They were excited, but there was also a sense of uncertainty in their eyes. They had seen Marcus spar, seen him teach, but this was different. This was a real competition where anything could happen. Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Master Tanaka standing beside him, a reassuring smile on his face. "Remember, Marcus," Tanaka said, his voice calm and steady. "This is about more than just fighting. It's about the journey. Win or lose, you've already shown everyone here what true martial arts is about." Marcus nodded, his heart steadying. Tanaka was right. This wasn't about proving himself. It was about showing the students that the greatest victory lay not in winning, but in the strength to keep fighting. The first round of the tournament was about to begin. Marcus stepped onto the mat, his opponent waiting on the other side. The young fighter across from him was eager, his eyes burning with competitive fire. He was quick, powerful, and confident, everything that Marcus had once been. And for a moment, Marcus felt the weight of his past life bearing down on him. But then as the referee called for the match to begin, something shifted inside him. The young fighter rushed forward, throwing a quick jab aimed at Marcus's chest. It was fast, but Marcus was already moving. His footwork was light, his body flowing with ease as he sidestepped the attack. The young fighter's momentum carried him forward, and Marcus, with a graceful twist, gently guided him to the mat. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Marcus didn't use force, he didn't need to. His technique was flawless, his movements as smooth as water. The young fighter, now on the mat, struggled to get up, but Marcus was already retreating, offering him the chance to reset. The referee stepped in, signaling the end of the round. "Point for Marcus," he called. Marcus stood, his chest steady as he bowed to his opponent. It wasn't a victory to gloat over. It was simply another moment in the journey. The young fighter, though defeated, stood and bowed back, his face filled with respect. As the tournament progressed, Marcus faced opponent after opponent. Some were faster, stronger, and more aggressive than he had anticipated. But with each match, he grew more confident, more at peace with the fight. His movements were fluid, his strikes precise, and his spirit unwavering. But the true test came when Marcus found himself facing the final opponent. A young, talented fighter named Alex. Alex was everything Marcus had once been, cocky, confident, and hungry for victory. He was quick, strong, and relentless. Marcus could see the fire in his eyes, the same fire that had once burned in him. This was not just another fight. This was the culmination of everything he had trained for, everything he had overcome. As the final match began, Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Alex rushed forward with lightning speed, throwing a barrage of punches and kicks, each one coming faster than the last. Marcus moved with ease, his experience guiding him as he avoided the attacks. But Alex wasn't backing down. He was relentless, his every move designed to wear Marcus down. For a brief moment, Marcus felt the familiar sting of doubt creep in. Could he keep up with this young, hungry fighter? Had he lost too much in his time away from competition? But then, he remembered the lessons he had taught the students at the dojo. Karate wasn't about overpowering your opponent. It was about understanding their movements, anticipating their next move, and using their energy against them. Marcus waited for the right moment. As Alex launched a powerful roundhouse kick, Marcus stepped aside, grabbing Alex's leg and twisting it, sending him crashing to the mat. The crowd gasped in shock. Alex, stunned by the move, tried to scramble to his feet, but Marcus was already there, his hand extended in a gesture of respect. Alex, breathing heavily, took Marcus's hand and pulled himself up. There was no anger in his eyes, only admiration. You're amazing," he said, his voice filled with respect. Marcus smiled, bowing once more. "It's not about being amazing," he said quietly. "It's about learning from every fight, every loss, every victory." The referee raised Marcus's hand, declaring him the winner of the tournament. The crowd erupted into applause, but Marcus stood still, his heart calm. He hadn't come here for applause. He had come here to show that even after everything he had lost, he still had the strength to rise again. As Marcus walked off the mat, he saw the students from the dojo watching him, their faces filled with pride. They had learned so much from him, not just about karate, but about life itself. And in that moment, Marcus realized that his true victory wasn't in the trophy he had won. It was in the lives he had touched, the lessons he had shared, and the strength he had found within himself. He had fought not for the past, but for the future. And that, he knew, was the greatest victory of all. The tournament had ended, and the gymnasium was filled with the echo of applause. Marcus, though victorious, stood quietly off to the side, the weight of the moment settling heavily in his chest. He had fought hard, not for the recognition, not for the glory, but for the lessons. The journey had meant more than the trophy, and he had proven to himself what he had always known, that strength wasn't defined by external victories, but by the resilience to rise again and again, no matter how many times life knocked you down. As the crowd gradually dispersed, the sense of victory lingered in the air, but so did something else, a sense of change. Marcus had shown them that martial arts wasn't just about combat. It was about the fight within. It was about the battle to stay true to yourself when the world constantly tries to change you. And above all, it was about honoring the past without letting it define you. But even with the applause and the newfound respect from the students, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something deeper, that he had to face. The tournament, though an important milestone, wasn't the end of his journey. He had come to the dojo to find peace, to heal the wounds of his past, but there was still one final test awaiting him. It was a test not of strength, but of acceptance. Back at the dojo, the students gathered around him, congratulating him on his victory. Jake, who had once been so resentful, stood at the front of the group, his eyes filled with admiration. He had come to see Marcus not just as a fighter, but as a mentor, someone who had shown him what true strength really was. "You did it, Marcus," Jake said, his voice sincere. "You proved that it's not about how many fights you win or how many titles you have. It's about the person you are inside, and today you taught all of us that." Marcus smiled, the weight of the journey finally starting to feel lighter. "It wasn't just me, Jake, it's all of you. You've all shown me the power of belief, the belief that we can all rise no matter how far we've fallen." The students, now gathered around him, nodded in agreement. They had watched Marcus fight, not just with his fists, but with his heart. They had seen him face the challenges of life with courage and grace, and they had learned that true martial artists weren't defined by their victories or defeats. They were defined by their ability to stand strong no matter what. Master Tanaka, who had quietly observed the scene, stepped forward. His eyes, usually stern, were soft with pride. "You've done more than win a tournament, Marcus. You've shown us the heart of karate. You've taught us that martial arts is not just about the fight. It's about the journey, about pushing forward, learning from every loss, and rising from every fall." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat, and for the first time in a long while he allowed himself to feel proud. Not of the tournament win, but of the people around him, the students who had become like family, the people who had witnessed his struggle and had become part of his healing. As the applause died down and the students began to leave for the night, Marcus lingered in the dojo, alone. He moved toward the back where the mirrors lined the wall. The reflection staring back at him was not the same man who had walked into the dojo months ago. He looked different, not just in appearance but in the way he carried himself. His shoulders were less burdened, his eyes less weary. The defeat that had once defined him no longer held power over him, but the past, as much as he had tried to move on from it, still lingered in the corners of his mind. The questions of what he could have been, what he had lost, those thoughts still occasionally crept in, threatening to undo the peace he had worked so hard to build. That night, after everyone had left, Marcus stood in the center of the dojo, just as he had done so many times before, but this time, it was different. There was no longer a sense of emptiness in the space. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. He wasn't here to chase after ghosts of the past. He was here to continue his journey, not as a former champion, but as someone who had learned to embrace both the light and the shadows of his life. He began to practice, his movements slower now, more deliberate. The kata flowed through him like a river, each movement connecting him to something deeper, something that no tournament or victory could ever take away. For the first time in years, he wasn't fighting. He was simply existing in the moment, in the rhythm of the fight, of the breath. And then, from the shadows, Master Tanaka appeared. "You've done it, Marcus. You've found your peace." Marcus stopped, lowering his hands in a bow. "I don't know about peace, Tanaka, but I found something close to it. I found the strength to let go of the past and the wisdom to accept what's in front of me." Tanaka nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You've earned more than a victory today, Marcus. You've earned the respect of this dojo, but more than that, you've earned the respect of yourself. And that is the greatest victory anyone can achieve." Marcus didn't respond at first. He simply stood there, taking in Tanaka's words. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he had carried for so long that he hadn't even realized how heavy it was until it was gone. "You know, Master," Marcus said after a long pause, "I thought I came here to find something outside of me, to find some kind of redemption or some way to reclaim my past. But what I've realized is that redemption doesn't come from trophies or titles. It comes from accepting who you are, no matter what." Tanaka smiled warmly, his eyes filled with wisdom. "You've learned what many people never do, Marcus. It's not about the world outside, it's about the world inside. The true battle is fought within." As the night grew darker, Marcus felt the peace that had eluded him for so long settle into his heart. The journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be obstacles. But now he knew that no matter what came his way, he was ready. He had faced the deepest parts of himself, the doubts, the fears, the regrets, and had emerged stronger. Not because he had conquered them, but because he had learned to live with them. As the lights dimmed in the dojo, Marcus looked around one last time. The place that had once felt like a refuge from the world now felt like home. The students, the sensei, the lessons, they had all played a part in his journey. And though he may never fully leave the shadows of his past behind, he knew that the light was always there, waiting for him to step into it. And for the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to feel a quiet sense of peace. Not because he had won the tournament, but because he had finally learned how to live. Not just for the fight, but for the journey itself. As the weeks rolled by, Marcus's presence in the dojo became a quiet but powerful force. It wasn't just his martial arts skills that had earned him respect, it was his way of being. The students had watched him transform from a quiet, seemingly broken man into someone they admired not just for his strength, but for his resilience. And though Marcus had entered the dojo to heal his own wounds, something had changed inside him. He realized that his true purpose was not just to fight, but to guide others, to help them find their own strength in ways they had never imagined. Yet, even with all the progress, Marcus couldn't ignore the feeling that his journey was far from complete. He had found peace within himself, but there was still one thing that weighed on him. It was the idea of his legacy. In a world that so often measures success by accolades and titles, Marcus wondered what kind of mark he would leave behind. Would his journey be remembered for the man he had become? Or would it simply fade into the background, a story that no one would remember? The question nagged at him, and so, one evening as the dojo slowly emptied out, Marcus stayed behind staring at the empty mats. He was alone now, the sense of community having already left with the last of the students. He had become accustomed to this solitude, this stillness that gave him the space to think. But tonight it felt different. It felt like the weight of the question he had been avoiding was finally catching up to him. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Marcus turned to see Master Tanaka walking toward him, his steps slow but purposeful. There was a sense of quiet wisdom in his eyes, and for a moment, Marcus wondered if Tanaka had sensed his unease. "Marcus," Tanaka said, his voice soft but steady. "You've been quiet these past few days. Is everything all right?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "I've been thinking about my place here, about what I've done, what I'm leaving behind. I've trained here, I've taught. But is it enough? Is my story one worth telling, or will it just fade away?" Tanaka stood silently for a moment as if weighing Marcus's words carefully. Then with a deep breath, he spoke. "Marcus, your legacy isn't defined by trophies or recognition. It's not about the medals you win or the records you set. Your legacy is in the hearts of those you've touched. It's in the lessons you've shared, the example you've set, and the way you've shown others what it means to keep moving forward, no matter the odds." Marcus frowned, his mind racing with doubt. But what if no one remembers? What if I'm just a brief chapter in someone else's story? Tanaka shook his head slowly. "It doesn't matter if you're remembered by the world. What matters is whether you've made a difference in the lives of those around you. And trust me, Marcus, you've made a difference. You've shown us all what true strength is, and that's something no one can ever take away from you." Marcus stood silently, the weight of Tanaka's words sinking in. He had been so focused on leaving a legacy that he had forgotten the most important part, that his legacy was already being built. It wasn't something that could be measured by awards or recognition. It was in the way he had impacted the students, the way they had come to look up to him, not just as a fighter, but as a person who had risen from the ashes of his past and shown them that anything was possible. "I guess I never thought about it like that," Marcus said, his voice softening. "I've spent so much time trying to prove something to myself and the world. I forgot that the true victory is in the people we leave behind, the lessons we pass on." Tanaka smiled, a proud glimmer in his eyes. "Exactly. And you've already done that, Marcus. You've left a mark on every person who has crossed your path. Your journey is already a testament to the power of perseverance. And that's something no one can ever take away." Marcus felt a shift inside him, as if the burden he had been carrying for so long had suddenly been lifted. The desire for recognition, the fear of being forgotten, it all seemed so insignificant now. What mattered most was the impact he had made, the way he had touched lives and helped others find their own strength. As the two men stood there, side by side, the soft hum of the city outside began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. The dojo, once a place of solitude and struggle, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where both Marcus and the students had found something far more valuable than victory or defeat. "You've taught us all more than you'll ever know, Marcus," Tanaka said, his voice filled with warmth. "And your journey isn't over. You've only just begun."